Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 13.
Episode 13. Now, Ben, I've been failing at the numbers thing lately, but I've got one for this one.
Go for it.
So, interesting fact, why people think the number 13 is unlucky actually ties back into Christian, I'm going to say either history or mythology, depending on your leaning. But it has to deal with Judas being the 13th disciple to sit down at the last dinner.
Wow. Did not know that.
People do not like 13.
Before early Christianity, people didn't think the number 13 was unlucky.
Based on all of the 2 minutes of research I did in the 13, nope.
Let's kick things off with a little bad at parenting.
Oh, bad at parenting, which apparently is turning into my section. I guess. I'm the one
I
who's
love
bad
it.
at parenting. So we're going to call it bad at parenting, but this one wasn't that bad, and I'll tell you why. This is just kind of a rehash or revisit on the kids eating food thing. Just make your kids eat food. There's a lot of parents like, oh, my kid's a picky eater and they don't like certain things, and then they adjust. Well, my philosophy to that is no, kids don't get to pick. They don't do the grocery shopping, so why should they get to pick what they eat? In this case, this is a win for me. I'm putting it in the win column because we had a game night a couple of weeks ago, and some people may have seen the video clip that we put up onto the Facebook page where my son pulled off the most amazing Jenga move ever.
I know.
If you
Go on our
seen
Facebook
it,
page and take a look at it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. And that's a whole thing in of itself. I'm so happy he had an epic gaming moment. That's going to lock him in forever. Neither here nor there. That night we got a Papa Murphy's Take and Bake Pizza because I'm a big fan of Papa Murphy's.
No, wait, you already told this story of Papa Murphy's Take and Bake Pizza on Thanksgiving. I hope you were trying to get back on the horse here.
I'm trying. I did a good job this time.
Okay.
I followed the directions. I watched the pizza. I didn't leave the room. The pizza was prepared appropriately, and it was delicious. Now, I remember, though, usually the kids get either plain cheese or plain pepperoni pizza. This time, however, we only got 2 pizzas, and my son wanted to try the double-layered, calzone-style pizza that Papa Murphy's does. And the only kind that you can make whatever kind, but the kind that I get is loaded with all meat on the inside and all vegetables on top.
It sounds like there's more opportunity to get it wrong here.
There is more opportunity to get that wrong, but I didn't. I followed the instructions. Everything was fine. That's not the part of the story, Ben. This is bad at parenting, not bad at cooking.
Bad
it's
at parenting.
A whole other segment. So,
bad at cooking. That needs to be a new segment.
So anyway, my daughter was eating this pizza that had more meats and vegetables than she's used to. And she said something during the meal that I took away as a categorical win. And that was, I don't like mushrooms, but I know I have to eat them.
Okay.
And I just, my wife goes, oh, well, okay, but if you don't like them, I go, none of it, but she said it right the first time.
That's good. You stopped her right before she put her foot in the proverbial mouth.
To full disclosure, I don't think that's actually how it happened. That's how I remember it happening, but I'm sure Nicole will dispute how cool I was in that story. So that's it. That's just my whole thing. Just make your kids eat whatever.
Down the vein of bad at parenting, we talk on this podcast sometimes about how we, we're just making it up as we go along. And I think kids and eating is a great example of that, where you kind of just have this vague idea, but think about how in our lifetimes ideas about nutrition and what's good for people have changed. So while doctors and scientists and nutritionists are making it up as they go along, we're doing the same as parents. We're just trying to raise a child that'll grow up. But there's also the frustration that come from them refusing to eat something we spent time preparing or whatever it is we bought or whatever we're having. And we're just trying to figure out how to do this. And I think your parents are prone to fall into the trap of just doing what they remember from their own childhood, which is probably something akin to, you'll eat what I prepared for you and you're going to sit there until you eat it, or something along those lines. And I kind of fell into that trap early on, and I was fortunate that my first 2 children weren't picky eaters. So when my daughter came along, my 3rd child, and was a very picky eater, we really had a contest of wills for years and years. And I don't know why, but one day I just stopped the fight.
You told this story, I think, in episode 2, 3, or 4, early on in the podcast.
So I think what may have influenced me and what I'm going to add new here is my sister's strategy for this. Because she, through just circumstance and fate, had 4 children in 4 years. And yeah, and so she was dealing with this kind of all at once and in a very concentrated manner. And she and her husband had come up, he's a psychology professor, specializing in like child psychology and special needs. And he and her came up with this strategy to introduce new foods into the children's diet that I love. What they'll do is they'll prepare the usual meal for the children, something that they already know the children like, and then they'll prepare something else. And they'll just put it on their plates and not on the children's plates. And the kids will go, "What's that?" And they'll go, "Oh, this is just for us. Can I have some?" "Oh, no, this is just for the adults." "No, I'd like to try some." "Okay, you can have a little." And that's how they introduce new foods into their children's diets. There's no recriminations. There's none of the, "I don't like them, but I know I have to eat them." It's just something new that they're curious about. It's not, "Ew, why did you put this on my plate? I don't want to eat it." It's like they only get it if they ask for it.
That's interesting. I do like that approach, though it is more effort. You do have to make 2 separate meals, one for you and one for the kids, with no set expected value. Like there's not guaranteed benefit coming out the other side of that.
That's the risk there.
It's a good one, though, if you're non-confrontational. Unlike me, this guy, 2 thumbs. Like, I'm very confrontational. No, sir.
I'm happy for you on your parenting win there with Jane.
That is the clear catalyzing moment that I have identified, and I know I have broken her spirit. She's just going to eat what I tell her to eat, and we're going to go from there. Perfect.
Now, I want to give a quick Ben versus Bureaucracy, because I told the story, I think last time or the time before, about me getting a bill for $111 from the Illinois Tollway for some toll booths that I never run because some person from Connecticut has the same license plate number as me.
Right. You were out of the state at the time, if I recall.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm out of the state this week, and I get another bill this time for like $50. And again, it's the same license plate, Connecticut license plate, same number as me. And I'm like, oh no, I got to call this place again. So first of all, I want to do, I think, the first ever for the Bad at Magic podcast, and issue a retraction. So I maligned the good name of the Illinois Tollway because when you dial up, they give you a notification that the employees are on like an assistance program.
Right.
So I want to give, I listened to their greeting on their call center, and I want to give the full greeting.
Our call center is operated by representatives from the Chicago Lighthouse, a not-for-profit organization providing employment for underserved communities, persons with disabilities, and veterans.
Okay.
So I called back this time and got right through to somebody. They immediately understood my problem, and they not only took care of it, but they told me that they would make an effort to make sure it didn't happen again, which I was dubious about. But I was out for a run today, and I got a call that was listed from an 800 number, and I blocked it because I never get good calls from 800 numbers, and they immediately called back. I'm like, that was weird. Robocalls don't do that. So I stopped running, and I answered it, and it was the Illinois Tollway call center, and they were just following up with me to tell me that they'd done what I'd asked.
Wow.
Yeah.
So not only did they fix your problem, but then they called you back just to let you know that they'd handled it?
I know, right? So I was feeling so guilty for maligning the Chicago Lighthouse employees that I went to their not-for-profit website and I made a donation. And I think it's a good cause, so I'm going to put a link in the show notes and on the Facebook page if anyone else would like to donate to the Chicago Lighthouse.
Wow. All right. So I'm in here laughing because there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Like, once again, we can illustrate the fundamental difference between myself and my co-host, Ben Rich. I would just say, oh, well, that's an amusing anecdote. Thank you for sharing that, Ben. Ben's going to take it to the next step. I donated money, and so should you, because these guys are doing a good job, and they deserve it.
Yeah.
Man, Ben Rich making the world a better place.
Well, and I felt bad for characterizing them poorly last time. Okay, so I just got back from a week in Colorado Springs. I didn't even mention this on the podcast last time, but I had the opportunity pop up for me to attend the AFCEA Rocky Mountain Chapter's annual Cyberspace Symposium, where they have like industry come out and do a convention, and then there's guest speakers and training classes and all kinds of stuff. And it's good for the like military cyber community to get together and just talk about the future. I won't bore you with a lot of the details about that because a lot of it was very boring.
You've already bored me with all the acronyms, but please continue.
Yeah, but part of it is there's like the senior leader of our community, the general officers, and there was also some like corporate CEOs from some of the corporations that came out. And I think theirs was the most interesting part, where they talked about what the future holds. as far as wireless communications everywhere, all of your devices being interconnected, and what that means for the military, and what our enemies will try to do to us, and what we should do to defend ourselves, and how we should modernize. There was one guy, oh man, he was from Google, and he was pulling no punches. He was like, it's obvious that the military is slow to change, and that is a big vulnerability, and you got to get better at it. He says right now, all over the military is Windows XP, and Windows XP is the venereal disease of the United States military.
Oof. Wow. That's a Microsoft guy trashing his old product, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, I could go on and on about all that cyber stuff, but while I was out in Colorado Springs, I stopped by the Air Force Academy, since we talked about that last time, took a few photos, picked up some souvenirs.
Yeah, Air Force Academy. Is it still terrible?
I wouldn't know. It was snowing that day, and it was peaceful and serene and looked real nice.
Did you see any of the cadets or watch any formations or anything?
I walked past 2 or 3 cadets in uniform. It's always striking to me how similar their uniforms are to actual military uniforms without actually being legit.
Well, and so the Air Force Academy uniforms, at least when I was there, they were just the older versions of the actual Air Force uniforms.
Right.
So those warehouses full of old service dress didn't go to waste.
I see. Okay, well, that's a good way to handle it. And then also, speaking of podcast pilgrimages, I had a layover both directions in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and I stopped by the cafe where you and I, where the seed for the idea of the podcast was planted, and took a photo that I'll put in the show notes.
That's a cool moment to be able to go and catalyze like this. This is where it all happened right here. This is where me and Ben and like had just kind of
Sex
a
and the City lady.
Yeah, the random Sex and the City lady. This is where we had a random conversation, one of thousands that we've probably had.
Uh-huh.
But this one was special because somebody overheard us and didn't call us nerds.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of being nerds, it's time for Bad at English.
Very nerdy.
So
I do. I'm going to tell you before we get started. Bad at English. I want to tell you, I love your Bad at English, and I'm no kidding. This is no joke. I have used crocodile closest to the canoe at least once a week ever since I've heard it. Like at work, at home. Like it's just such a great. Like this is the most important thing right now. Crocodile closest to canoe just sounds so much better.
Yeah, and I've had other listeners of the podcast tell me also that they use language that they've gotten on Bad at English. So I love that this segment is useful in people's lives. So this one will not be useful to people at all.
Perfect. Love it.
Okay. So one day we were talking about someone, and they were either in prison or going to be in prison, and a person I was with, a British person, said, "Oh, he'll be living at Her Majesty's pleasure." I'm like, what? Say that again? Living at Her Majesty's pleasure, which is a funny kind of way of saying that someone is in jail, basically, that they can't get out because they've been convicted.
Yeah, and it's funny about that is when I hear that, living at Her Majesty's pleasure, I take it to the other end. I take it to like, oh, they would be dead if the Queen hadn't actively stopped them from dying.
You're only alive because the Queen let you be.
Exactly. That's what I hear.
They're not much of a, from having a past of, like beheading and drawn and quartered and that kind of stuff. They're quite light when it comes to that kind of living at Her Majesty's pleasure. So what I like about this phrase is it's a legal term of art, which has kind of this nuance to it. It infers that you recognize the authority of the Queen as representative of the head of government, and then the fact that you're living at Her Majesty's pleasure is a reference to that. And I found other ones like that. Like, for instance, whenever we would go TDY and we could claim as a business expense our meals that we were consuming, everyone would say, "We're having steak tonight, boys. The Queen is buying." Which, again,
that's nice. Yeah.
They use the idea of Queen Elizabeth as this analog for the authority of government.
That's interesting. We kind of do that in the States as far as like trying to assign blame or responsibility for things that happen in the government to the president, even though that's entirely wrong. People, please do your research. The legislative branch does way more than you think it does. But we don't ever point to it the way that these sayings, you're saying that the British people do, as far as just like the entire government is wrapped up in this person.
Yeah, exactly. So they just think of it as that single person. And I found that this is true in any country that is part of the Commonwealth realm. So Canada, Australia, other countries like that. So, yeah, if you are in jail and you ever hear someone say he's living at Her Majesty's pleasure, that means you're in jail.
Okay, I've never been comfortable or understood entirely the association with the other first world countries like Australia and Canada with the United Kingdom. Like, do they still recognize the British Queen as the royal head of their government, as the sovereign state?
She's on their money.
I know, yeah, and this is why it's confusing. But
So,
she's not the
CGP
sovereign
Grey
head.
did a fantastic video about this that explains it way better than I could. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the CGP Grey video about the Commonwealth.
All right, listeners, like, seriously, Ben and I are big fans of CGP Grey. Listen to his podcast, watch his show. Shout out to CGP Grey. Woo! And he does a lot of excellent things, and he is American living in Britain, and he does the best videos of explaining how Britain works to Americans, because I don't know.
I would guess that they referenced this video to try to understand it, because it is really confusing. Just like, I think I first heard of him when I looked up a video on the difference between Great Britain and the United Kingdom, which I did not understand at the time, and now I do, thanks to him.
That one I do remember.
Let's move on to what's probably going to make up the bulk of our podcast today.
So I'm legitimately excited about this because I'm the type of person that I get really sucked into stories, like really into stories, and I think way too long and hard about things that aren't real. And this is why I think I love fiction so much. It's like, there's the nuances and the ins and outs of it. So what we're going to do for everybody that may not have heard the last podcast is we are going to go through a ton of intellectual property. Like, we're going to look at a bunch of movies, a bunch of books, a bunch of anime TV shows. We're going to go through as much as we can. Some of them were suggested by listeners. Some of them we came up with ourselves. Other ones we found online. And we are going to apply, basically, we're going to describe what the magic system is like. And so with that, there are two sets of two sets of criteria that we're going to apply to this IP. And the first one is hard versus soft magic. So obviously all the IP that we're talking about is going to have some fantastical, some magical element to it. Whether it's flat out magic like in Harry Potter, or if it's like sci-fi technobabble like from Star Trek or Star Wars. There's some kind of supernatural force that's going to be involved. And when we're talking about hard versus soft magic, so a hard magic system is something that is very specific, very clear, and you, the outside observer, can understand the rules and limitations. Obviously, you may not understand how exactly it works, but you understand the limits. You know the boundaries there are set and clear, and you get it. A soft magic system is exactly the opposite. It's where you may or may not understand the magic system, but there are no real boundaries. You don't have any real set understanding of how big it gets or how much people can do with it or where just what the rules are.
Yeah,
that's
so
the first.
So the categories that you described of kind of like mysticism magic versus like pseudo-science magic, I think that those tend to be roughly correlated to hard magic versus soft magic. With science, pseudo-science magic, it tends to be hard. There's limits to it, and you understand what the limits are. And then like mystical kind of arts, that it tends to not have limits and you don't understand it. It's vague and undefined.
That is super interesting because I don't think that is true at all. And so that's probably going to come out as we talk about some of the specific IPs. This is all right. I'm really excited now because obviously we have differences of opinion here. All right, that's the first set of criteria. We're going to go through each IP and we're going to decide if it's hard or soft. The second criteria that we're going to apply to it, and it's going to be Sanderson's Laws of Magic. So Brandon Sanderson, probably my favorite author, he laid out the rules for using magic in storytelling, and I'm a huge fan. Go read Brandon Sanderson. He's great. But here are his laws of magic. Sanderson's first law of magic is an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands that magic. So the idea there being that if you're going to use magic to solve the conflict or to progress the plot or to do something in your story, The difference between the readers thinking this is crap or the readers thinking, wow, that was really clever, is based upon how well the reader understands the magic system. An example that we can use, because we talked about this already, is the latest Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, where at the end, the magic system, we had no real idea what was going on, and so the resolution of the conflict wasn't satisfying. Everybody in the theaters is kind of like, well, I guess that happened. And that's because it failed on Brandon Sanderson's first law of magic. Second, the limitations of a magic system are more interesting than its capabilities. I think that's self-explanatory. That's self-explanatory, and we've talked about that before, talking about Magic the Gathering, like the game. The limitations that you put on yourself make the game more interesting than like exploring new territory is. Lastly, the third law is expand on what you have already before you add something new. Again, I'm pointing at you, the latest Star Wars movies, coming up with force powers that we've never seen before just to resolve random conflicts. You could have resolved all that very satisfyingly with force powers we've seen. You didn't have to come up with new stuff that just confused and made everybody go, well, why didn't they just do that the whole time? This kind of ties in with the storytellers breaking their own rules. The rules that they've established previously are then broken later, which then leaves us, the viewer or the reader, feeling dissatisfied.
Okay, so the first part is it's up to the author or the director or whoever's creating the intellectual property to try to help the viewer or the reader understand the magic system. Then the magic system is more interesting because of its limitations and because of its capabilities. And then use what you already got instead of adding something new when it comes to resolving the conflict or moving the plot along.
Right. And so each one of the intellectual properties we're going to talk about does these to varying degrees of success or failure. And so after we declare whether the magic system is hard or soft, we will give it kind of you said a letter grade. I think we can stick with letter grades on how well it adhered to Sanderson's laws of magic. And that's going to correlate, I think, very closely with how people felt after reading the book or walking out of the theater, like if it was a great movie or if it was a terrible movie.
Okay, now I added some things here just to kind of enrich the discussion. So, as we're looking at these intellectual properties, I want to try to decide, like, how is the magic introduced? How did they do that in the movie generally? What was the protagonist's attitude toward it? Because there's all kinds. Sometimes they're very reluctant and unwilling, and sometimes they're excited and very willing. And how was the magic system related to the central conflict? Was it the source of the conflict? Was it just ancillary and it's just kind of a plot device? Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist? And what kind of conflict are we having? Is it man versus man versus himself, or man versus nature? We don't necessarily have to answer all those questions, but I think they relate to this discussion about the magic system.
Well, and like just your questions illustrate the whole idea that if you're reading or consuming some type of media that has a magic system in it, that is a big determining factor on whether or not it is a good story. And the questions that you're asking here are directly related to how the story evolves and progresses and is resolved.
Okay. Well, let's dive in. What's our first intellectual property we've got up?
All right. Big fan. So we've got this big, giant, long list that you were kind enough to sort, catalog, and then hyperlink for us. Ben, way better prepared for this than I am. All right, so the first set that we have is you categorize them as mysticism, and this is just straight magic, I think is what you were going for here. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So first off, we're going with Harry Potter.
All right, so let's talk about Harry Potter.
I've never read the book, so I'm assuming we're going with movies.
Yeah, I don't think the movies depart from the books hardly at all. I mean, it really isn't that book-movie problem. It's just
okay, so we're going to abstract the whole book versus movie thing away.
Yeah.
We're going to say just Harry Potter.
Yep, Harry Potter.
Okay. So hard versus soft. I'm going to say soft.
I'm going to agree with you there.
Okay. So at the beginning, like we see in the first movie where they're going to class and it's very important that they enunciate the spells exactly correctly. And
I want to back up even before that. So we start out with Harry Potter, who's a muggle. He's just living the muggle life under the stairs in his, aunt's and uncle's house.
Hang on a second. Living the muggle life. I want that on a shirt.
Living the muggle life.
Living the muggle life. All right, sorry, go ahead.
So he's under the stairs, and then the owl comes and tries to give him a letter. And then they try to keep him out, and more owls come, and more owls come, and more owls come. And this is the introduction of magic into muggle life. Until this moment, they didn't know magic existed in the world.
Well, I think the aunt and the uncle knew.
They knew, but
person
they were in this weird kind of denial that I think only exists in storytelling, where they know that it exists and they're trying to pretend that it doesn't, like that'll make it go away.
Right. Oh, hey, by the way, there's this universe-altering fact that we are clued in on, and we're just going to keep our mouths shut for no reason.
For no reason, yeah. Okay, so we're both in agreement that Harry Potter is a soft magic system. Now you were getting to the kids get so, and this kind of happens gradually. Harry is us. He's like, all right, Ron and Hermione already know about magic, but now I'm going into this world and everything is new to me. At least for the first book or two, it's just awe and wonder as all the things that Harry learns are now possible.
Right, and like in the evidence that I was coming up with to demonstrate that this was a soft magic system was in movie 1, he's in class, and like you're saying, they're using that as a tool to not only introduce him, but introduce us, because Harry is the allegory for the viewer and the audience, to what's going on, and like everything is so particular and so important, you must do it exactly this way. And then we skip to like towards the end of the series where we have, it's like Dumbledore and Voldemort like in a big giant hallway having some magic throwdown, and neither one of them says a word. And I don't even know if they had wands. Like they were just flinging their arms around, and just this ridiculous giant coalescing nonsense was happening. So is there rules here? Like,
well, we're going to have a problem because when we look at these intellectual properties that are epics, there's individual stories like each one of the 7 books, and then there's the grand story that arcs across them all. And if you just contrast the introduction of magic in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the first book to what the ultimate conflict at the very end of the last book, it looks like there's a bit of an inconsistency. But if we're just going to apply the first rule, like the author's ability to solve a conflict is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic, I think J.K. Rowling does that very well. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, please. No, justify your position, because I'm going to tear it down.
Okay, so in the first book, we spend the whole time with our young kids just being introduced to magic and just barely learning to scratch the surface. And there's this hint that there's this massive evil wizard out there who fully has mastered magic. And they kind of have to take him on, and it feels kind of hopeless.
Okay. That's how you feel? That's what you're saying is the...
And within each book, she uses these rules unwittingly, I think, where she understands the limitations, teaches us what our heroes are capable of, and in the end, they solve the problem using the limitations that they have. In the end, Hermione uses her encyclopedic knowledge that comes from lots of reading, and Ron uses his courage, and Harry uses his resourcefulness, and they are able to conquer a weakened Voldemort, in the dungeons under the Hogwarts.
How exactly in the first book was Voldemort defeated by Harry?
Crap! Good thing I hyperlinked these.
So I'll spoil it for you. It was the scene where he's in the room, and there was like he tried to run away, but then the fire came up, so he was stuck there with the teacher who had Voldemort living on the back of his head.
Yeah.
Right. And the guy came over to literally strangle Harry to death, I believe, something of that sort, and his hands started burning and turned to stone at one point or something and started falling off of his body.
Oh,
and
no.
It was nothing. Yeah, it was nothing that Harry did. It was nothing that we had ever heard of in the entire movie. And then Harry ran over and he put his hands on the guy's face, and then he died. And then we got this expose from Dumbledore after the fact, after the scene happened. It was like, oh, it's because of your mother's love for you when she died. Like, really? That's how we're going to resolve the conflict in this movie, is some random just wave our hands and the bad guy's done.
Okay, so I'd like to say then they do help the reader understand magic throughout. The system that they're introducing. It is a soft system. There Very are soft. Limitations of it that come from, what kind of wand you hold, or whether or not your potion is mixed appropriately, or whether or not you pronounce the magic word correctly. But they do violate the third rule there at the end, where we add something new rather than expand on what we already have.
Okay, so we agree that it's soft. Let's do the letter grade for the magic system, how it adheres to Sanderson's 3 laws.
Okay,
you go first?
For how well the reader understands the magic system.
Oh, we're going to go each one? I was going to roll it all up into one.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm giving it a D.
Oof.
Like, yeah, oof. Author's ability to solve conflict with magic. How well we understand magic, we don't understand it at all. Harry's being introduced, we're being introduced, but there's always this unknowable quantity that we just, even by the end, we have no idea what it can and can't do. Forget it. We don't understand any of it. The limitations, right back to what I was talking about. We have no idea what's going on ever. And 3,
Ever.
ever. Expand on what you have, what you already have before you add something new. Yeah, they fail at that too, because every movie there's some new MacGuffin, there's some new thing that they're having to deal with. And like all the way up to the end, all the way up to the very end with the Deathly Hallows. It's like, oh, there are these 3 magical artifacts that can destroy the entire world or whatever. And we're just now hearing about them? Like they've been this, that felt like such a redaction.
Even when I wasn't aware of these rules and I consumed it the first time, I have to agree with you that I felt kind of this sense of like, instead of her building on it, she just kept adding some new MacGuffin. You know, and now he's got the Horcruxes, and now, you know, now he's got a host, or now, whatever. And it just felt like you could never defeat him, he could never go away, and there was always going to be something else that she hadn't introduced yet that now has been there the whole time.
Yup.
So
that's just how that whole series was, which is why I give it such a low grade.
I feel like that she introduced a universe that was built around the existence of magic, where she introduces it to us a little bit at a time. She builds on it. She creates boundaries around it. There are people with varying levels of mastery, and as our protagonist grows through this system, they develop their capabilities, like you said, from at the beginning, where they have to say the exact right words, till the end, where they just flick their wrist with their wand and they're basically accomplishing the same things.
Okay, so if you really like Harry Potter and the idea of building this magical world that exists above and beyond what already exists in the actual mundane world, I'm going to recommend a series called, I think it's called The White Mage. I think that's how I was introduced to it. You read the first book and it's like, it feels like a rip-off, a carbon copy of Harry Potter. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not.
Which came first?
I don't know which came first, honestly. But here's the key difference for me. It's a tween novel, so it's got all the tween novel like stuff that you've just got to deal with, like the 14-year-old, like, oh, I've got a crush on a boy. Like, I don't care. We don't care about that part. What's interesting is that later in the book, like, there is this magical world that exists with the mundane, but then they show and they demonstrate, and there are scenes where they're describing how government-level entities know about it and interact with the magical world. Like, there's this great chapter about a CIA spec ops team having to take down a rogue, like, evil wizard that's just living in a city somewhere. What? Yeah, it's awesome. That portion of it is fantastic.
All right, maybe we'll add that to our little thing we're gonna do at the very, very end.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
All right, because that sounds intriguing. But let's get back to Harry Potter. So you gave him a D. I'm gonna give it a B.
Wow, a B?
Yeah, a B.
Oh my, a B?
Yeah, but you know how it is when the first person goes in a gymnastics contest, then you kind of have to decide whether something's up or down from there when you give your grades. So
you can't skew these letter grades because you liked it. Harry Potter was fine,
because I thought they were successful at their introduction and following of these kinds of principles surrounding the use of a magic system.
Boo, sir, boo.
All right. So, who would you say? Would you say it's an oversimplification to say that the protagonist is Harry and the antagonist is Voldemort?
That is not an oversimplification. No, that is constantly every single book.
Okay, but I mean, we also there's other characters and they're having their own journey.
It's Harry versus Voldemort's minions is what it is. Every single book.
Right. Yeah. But you know, you've got Ron and Hermione and a few other characters and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, I'm going to embarrass myself at some of my other listeners who I know are way better at this. I mean, my wife's read the whole series like 5 times.
Oof. Yeah, so you're going to look like a chump defending Harry Potter against this guy over here.
Yeah, I know. She's going to be yelling and be like, Ben, why aren't you doing better at defending Harry Potter? But full confession, I was reading the books until I got to like the 4th or 5th one, and the movies had started coming out. And I was enjoying the movies way more than the books, way more. and so that's the argument I have with my wife. She wants to talk about why the books are better, and I want to talk about why the movies are better.
So I will say this, Ben. Like, if we produce a podcast where we have our listeners yelling at nobody in traffic, I think we've won. I think we've won.
Success.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next IP. So and I'll make an infographic of all of our ratings when we're done.
Ooh.
So the
All
next
right.
IP that we have up is, I also put it under the category of mysticism, but I have an asterisk next to it because I believe it's both mysticism and pseudoscience, and that is Star Wars.
So it's the. I think Star Wars falls better under the mysticism because the main conflict is this good versus evil, the light side versus the dark side. And the technology just kind of exists in the background, and it's all taken for granted. And right up until the postquels, is that what we're calling them? Is that the official name?
Yes.
The
No, I named it that because I couldn't find a better name.
I really like that. The postquels, which is the Disney 3 movies that just came out. Like the other ones were very good at consistently just like, oh, there is technology, spacefaring, and speeders and hovercraft and jetpacks, and that's fine. But it all exists in the background. Like nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Right. It's
That's
just taken
easy.
as a given.
Exactly. The stuff that's hard to understand, that needs to be introduced and explained, is the Force, because that's something that we don't inherently just get.
So would you agree that it's both then a hard and a soft magic system?
No, I 100% believe that Star Wars, it was hard. I'm going to say it was hard in both the original series and the prequels, and then these postquels turned it into a soft system.
Okay, so let's argue this out for a minute, because if soft magic is vague and undefined and any rules or limitations are never clearly explained, like that, the Force feels like such a great example of that to me. Like, what can it do? What's the upper limit? What's the lower limit? Who can feel it? Who can use it? Who knows if they are or not? How much can you do with it?
Right, and that I understand. And the reason that I'm saying that it was hard before and it's soft now is because in the original trilogy and the prequels, the Force wasn't that big of a thing. Like, yeah, like the people that could use it were a big deal, but it's not that they were super-powered people. They had augmented physical capabilities, and they had like a heightened sense and awareness and reaction speed, but that was it. Like they were somewhat elevated over the average person. They had like the biggest, fanciest things that they did was Force pushing and pulling, and not even that big stuff. Like we're talking about pushing like a guy to knock him over, or pulling a lightsaber out of a snowdrift.
Yeah,
yes,
it's
Yoda,
really something.
Yoda picked up an X-wing. I get that, so just don't start yelling at me about Yoda picking up an X-wing. Size matters not.
But also in the age of laser blasters, all you're carrying is a sword. I mean, it's like you're bringing the proverbial knife to a gunfight, except that you are enabled by the Force, which makes your scissors superior to their rock.
Well, even Obi-Wan says, like, Obi-Wan killed Grievous, with the coolest character, so underrated, by the way. He killed Grievous with a blaster. And like after he did that, he looked at the guy's smoldering.
So uncivilized.
So uncivilized, and threw it away. It's like, oh, anybody can do this. Now that said, like there is an argument to be made that Jedi with blasters would be better than Jedi without blasters, but it's a whole thing.
Okay, so just look at A New Hope. Only A New Hope. It feels like, for some reason, George Lucas in his young age was more wise than he was in his older age. And he, introduces Luke as our character who doesn't understand the Force. What's the Force? Teach me about the Force. And Obi-Wan is our wise teacher who's saying the Force is all around us.
Again, Luke is our allegory for the audience. We don't know what's going on, so explain it to Luke, which is really explaining to us.
Right. So he's teaching him how to use the Force. He gives him the helmet with the blast shield, which is the stupidest thing I've ever seen, and gives him a lightsaber and has the thing flying around, and they all stand close like a bunch of parents standing around kids doing a piñata at a party, and inside of a spaceship, and tell Luke
we are going to argue about this because, all right, what the idea there is, like, this is the character development that Luke goes through his character arc through the 3 movies, is he has to learn to stop, just accepting all of the stuff that's around him, the spaceships and the speeders, and, you have to accept and open up and, not just know, but feel it and believe in this superior, larger force that binds everything and that exists in the universe. And until you actually can open yourself to it, then you're just not going to get it. And if you have any skepticism, any doubts, any worries, all of that is going to wear against your ability to actually accept and understand and let the universe help guide you and do the things that you need to do. Hence the blind lightsaber deflecting the blaster bolts.
But then that's still soft. I don't understand how you think that's hard. It's still kind of
vague. So, you're right. So that is kind of vague, but the powers that we saw that were demonstrated to us in the original trilogy and the prequels were very confined, very discreet. They're very small things. Like in the prequels, we got our first glimpse of Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan back in their prime, like full up Jedi Knights, like jumping around doing everything. That was great.
I know. It was exciting to go.
Yeah, it was. But did they do anything absurd with the Force the entire time?
No, they jumped. They ran fast. They went and breathed underwater. I don't know.
Well, they had the little breathers for the underwater.
Okay, that was pseudo-science technology.
That was pseudo-science again. Yeah, so that's we have rebreathers now. We have artificial gills. They're enormous and they don't fit in your mouth like that. But besides the point, what I'm trying to get at is those 6 movies, like the Force was not that big of a thing. It gave you heightened physical capabilities and heightened awareness, and you were able to do some things that other people weren't. But that's it. That was kind of the outside limit. Like the most powerful thing we'd ever seen anybody do was the Force tasing.
There was a little bit of extra stuff. There was also like communicating with ghosts and hearing voice across the galaxy and that kind of thing.
I'm gonna roll that into like, all right, you're breaking me down. It's pretty soft, but my argument here is not necessarily. All right, I'm gonna back off of my argument. I said they were hard. I'm gonna say instead that they were harder in the first 6 than they were in the last 3. The last 3, especially the Rise of Skywalker, we throw everything out the window. The Force can do whatever is convenient for the movie at the time.
Okay, so let's see. So at least for the prequels and the original trilogy, we kind of understand the limitations, and then they expand on what you already have before you add something new. Like, I think the stereotypical culmination of this is in A New Hope when Luke's going down the trench and he turns off his targeting computer to rely on the Force.
Yes, to accept that information from the universe and let himself be guided.
Right. Okay.
Now, this is an interesting thing to point out, is the original trilogy was about Luke's progression. Like, a lot of those movies, especially the second one, was dedicated to his training and his trying to, like, evolve and become this thing. In The Rise of Skywalker, that all happened off-screen between the second and third movies. Like, between movie 2 and 3, Rey is just now a Jedi Knight.
Right.
And we didn't get to see any of it.
Yeah, it was probably as much tied up in the death of Carrie Fisher as it was anything, but yeah.
Ugh. We can talk about Star Wars and rip on that for another whole episode if we want.
No, we did that already.
We did. No, we're going to do it again. But let's continue with our letter grades. So we agree that my stance is that it was all right. So it kind of started medium, and then it got softer as it progressed.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's give a letter grade for how well they follow the laws for each of the groups of 3.
Okay, please. Yes, that's good. Because if we had to loop them all together, they were all going to suffer.
Okay.
All right, so for the original trilogy...
You think original trilogy and the prequels get the same grade?
No, I think the magic system was handled similarly in the 2 sets. The storytelling was trash in the second 3, but the Force didn't change in those.
I don't know. In the prequels, they start discussing midi-chlorian counts and stuff like that.
I've tried so hard to block that.
Is that an attempt to understand the limitations of the system or to help the reader understand said magic?
It was an arbitrary thing. Like, it was just some device to communicate to the audience who has no knowledge of the Force to say, hey, this kid is seriously Force powerful.
Yeah, okay.
And, like, honestly, it would have been better if Qui-Gon Jinn just said that. It's like, why are you so into this kid, Master? It's like, because this kid is dope. That's why, Obi-Wan. Now shut your face.
He is extremely Force sensitive.
Yeah, something all stuck up in British. Yeah, that's what he would have said.
Okay.
All right, so for the original trilogy, I'm going to say it was soft but harder than it's been recently. And then for a letter grade, I can't bias because I like the original trilogy. I'm going to give it, I've got to give it like a B-, like a C+ probably.
Okay.
Just because of the fact that resolving the conflict with what we know about the magic system, the limits aren't well defined, but they did expand well on what they already had. Like, they didn't introduce a whole ton of Force stuff. They introduced just a little bit. So yeah, and they resolved the conflict with the use the Force Luke moment, and that felt like a good payoff for him trying to expand his awareness of it.
Yeah, that was using what you already have.
Yeah. What do you think?
Okay. I'm going to give the original trilogy an A, and I concur that it's softer.
Okay. Yeah, you think it's softer than I do.
Yeah.
For the prequels, Prequels were terrible movies, so it's hard to...
Okay, so this is where the pseudoscience comes into it. Like, for instance, if you remember the movie, I think it was in the second movie, I forget what it was called, where R2-D2 goes flying off the platform and out the sides of his arms come rocket engines and he goes flying through the air.
Yeah.
Now that from this like you said, as far as the actual science went in the original trilogy, it was all just background noise. They took hyperdrive and light speed and lightsabers and hovercraft and everything for granted. It was just it was noise in the universe we live in. Everyone believed it. There was no reluctance about it. But then when we went back to the prequels, now all of a sudden they're introducing technologies that we didn't have in the original trilogy.
Which makes no sense. Makes no sense.
No.
How many times?
That should never have made it past storyboarding.
Never.
All right, we're going to let R2-D2 fly.
How many times have we seen R2-D2 at the base of some stairs and he does the thing where he pulls up one wheel and does this weird duck hopping up the stairs really super slowly? It's stupid.
So to me, the prequels violate the rules of magic if we're accepting the pseudoscience as part of the magic system. Okay. Otherwise, the Force part they were pretty consistent about.
The Force part they were fairly consistent about, all except the catalyzing ultimate resolve of the arc at the end, which is, that's it, Anakin. I'm slightly higher elevated than you are. This is over. This epic fight that we've been having for the past several hours across lava
multiple
flows,
terrain. Yeah.
Yeah. Literally at one point on a ladder. Right. It's now over because I am 4 feet higher than you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Fail. Super fail. Fail.
All right. What letter grade do you give the prequels?
Honestly, just with that moment, and you bringing up the pseudoscience thing, that's good because you're right. They really yada-yada'd a lot of things that didn't make any sense, taking the original trilogy into account. So I've got to give them a D.
All right. I'm going to go C on this one. How about the postquels?
Postquels. Oh, God, Ben. The postquels.
Do we just give them an F and get it over with?
Yep, F. Hard
okay,
F.
Just same F. Yeah. We don't understand what's going on. They aren't abiding by any limitations, and they aren't just expanding what we already have. There's always new stuff being added in all three movies.
The last movie was such a train wreck. Such a freaking train wreck. It was just walking out of the theater with, did they just throw sticky notes with stupid ideas on a storyboard and just go with what stuck?
And just like I pointed out in the prequels, the science versus the Force, in the postquels, you had given a great example of the one thing they'd done well in the last movie, where over the entirety of the postquels, there was this cross-dimensional link between Rey and Kylo Ren that they'd been developing until it culminated in her giving him a lightsaber.
Yes.
Via the Force. And I felt like that was earned, that was done within these rules, that particular thing.
That was the only moment in that movie where the audience cheered, I think, when I was in there.
Yeah, because it followed these rules. Brandon Sanderson didn't. These aren't his rules. These are just if you want to use magic to tell your story, it's going to pay off better if you're restrained about it.
Yes, and that's why people cheered, because that was the payoff.
Right.
There's a great payoff moment that we need to talk about, but it's lower on our list. It's in the Marvel section, so we'll get there.
Well, let's move on to another IP. So one of our listeners had requested...
Hang on a second.
Go ahead.
Let's let all of our listeners just do a collective sigh. Hey, we're done talking about Star Wars. Everybody just...
Detox.
Thank goodness. We got through it. Okay.
Done with Star Wars. So one of our listeners had requested that we talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender.
And I thought that was fantastic because I had forgotten about that, but I was big into Avatar when it was out on Nickelodeon when I was a younger man. Not so recently, I have not watched the new series Korra, or I think, what is it? I don't even know what it's called, but there's another series that came out in the same universe.
You're making our listeners yell at their
Yes,
podcast.
Everybody yelling at your podcast right now, that is not helpful. Go on the Reddit, go on the Facebook, and I'll ignore you there. Okay.
So but I have to make a confession first about Avatar: The Last Airbender, because you watched it when it came out originally. I did not. When it came out on Netflix, my family got really into it. My wife and my kids watched it all the way through 3 times. I was aware that they were watching it. I would sit down every now and then and watch 10 minutes of an episode here and there. So I'm kind of vaguely aware of it, but I cannot really discuss this.
Okay. And so this, I would encourage you to go back and watch it a little bit, or try to digest a little bit of it. And here's the reason why. This is it's in this rare category of media that is designed and marketed and made for a younger audience, but the writers do such a great job of an overall storytelling, not just within each individual episode, but on a larger arc, that I think it transcends that audience and becomes acceptable for a larger set of people.
Like Pixar movies.
Like Pixar movies, like I'm going to say My Little Pony goes into that. There's a lot of grown men that are big into My Little Pony. Don't laugh. Don't laugh. Oh, he's laughing so hard. All right, listeners. Slight confession.
I'm putting a photo of the broniest brony I can think of in the show notes. That's what I'm imagining right now.
So I'm a bit of a brony, not the ridiculous extent that I think you're laughing about. But anyway, the idea there. So Avatar's really good. It's a younger audience. They have a very... You don't watch it, so what, am I just going to go off on the whole thing?
Well, I'm aware of what's going on. We got Aang, and somehow he's like new to all this. So again, he's our Luke Skywalker, he's our Harry Potter, where he's introduced to this world where people have power over fire, earth, water, and maybe air, and he might be the chosen one.
He is. Like, this is the thing. Like, he was... so there's the four elements. There's air, earth, fire, and water. And there are people that are born that can manipulate these elements, and they're called benders. And like he can control air, and so he's an air bender.
So is this like Harry Potter, where you're either a muggle or a wizard or a witch, but you can't, like, you're born that way and that's it? That's all.
Kind of, yeah. It's an inherent magical thing. Like either you can't learn to do it. And people can't learn to do others. Like if you're born and you are a waterbender, like you're not going to be able to bend anything else.
Except for the chosen one.
Except for the Avatar,
right?
Who is it's a reincarnated soul is the storytelling device.
Okay,
like it's kind of the same person over and over, but not really. So in every there is always an Avatar. So when one Avatar dies, then some person being born in the world simultaneously is that person still, but they don't know it, and they don't have any memory of their previous existences. They just are. They are the one person that can eventually learn to bend all of the elements. And they have an affiliation with one very, very strongly. And so they're always a bender. In this case, Aang was an airbender. And they identified him as, he was like 10 or 12. And like, actually, you're the Avatar. And we've done this test and we figured out that you're the one, you can learn to manipulate all of the elements, which puts you on this pedestal above everybody else. And it's your responsibility to do all of these, big things. A lot of it has to deal with the balance of the elements in the world and how people interact and et cetera, et cetera.
So how many there were 3 seasons of this?
I think there was 4 seasons. Like each season is specifically associated with one of the elements
episodes.
That he was dealing with.
So they probably kind of had an idea before they even started how long this was going to take. So they kind of had like a mini arc and then a big arc they were trying to do. So it was done in a very coherent, well-planned way.
Exactly. Yes, it was done very well. The character transition, or the character development of not only Aang but also his 2 like companions that are following him along the whole time are waterbenders. There is the first season, his primary antagonist. We actually follow him around for a super long time, and his character development arguably is more interesting than anybody else's in the series, including our.
He's a firebender, right?
He is a firebender. And eventually he's the one that teaches Aang how to firebend towards the end. But like his character development is incredibly fascinating to see him grow from like just pure evil to recognizing that there's a larger world that he's a part of. Like, and seeing his transformation is really interesting. So
what I've always enjoyed about it, whenever I catch a few minutes of an episode, is it's serious, but it's also very silly. Like they're clowning around and they're making jokes, and it legitimately cracks me up.
It's a very serious situation, a very serious world that they live in, but these are all kids that are like 14 and 15 years old. So yeah, right. They're ridiculous at times.
Yeah. Okay, so hard or soft? What do you say?
Definitely hard. It's a very hard magic system. You learn quickly. Like, you might not know like the outer edges of what specific benders can do, but you have an idea. Like for example, earthbenders can manipulate dirt and earth and things, but they can't do anything with metal. And so one of the big limiting factors is whenever they're trying to confine earthbenders, because you can imagine earth is everywhere. Like if you have an earthbender criminal, they always put them in an all metal cage because they can't manipulate or do anything with it, except for a very, very select tiny handful of people, and they explain that very well before it happens. And so, like, they do a good job of showing and not telling what the discrete boundaries are for each type of
from
magic.
a boundaries perspective, how do they deal with things like the fact that human flesh is water and earth?
Because they have things like the waterbenders. Like, there is this dark side of waterbending called bloodbending, where you
Yikes.
can just straight kill
That sounds
people.
spooky.
Yeah, that sounds evil, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, and there was a whole couple episodes about
Don't bend my
them
blood.
dealing with-
Don't bend my blood.
Yeah, just ripping blood out. But again, it's something that you can't just immediately do. It's like you have to go through some character transformation to manipulate or to change how you view the world or interact with the universe in order to do it in the first place.
Okay, so hard magic system. How do we? And I assume the conflict resolution is done within the boundaries of what we've been shown.
Yes, it does an excellent job of. So the way that you progress, or that Aang progresses in this magic system and learns more and expands himself, is always some inner struggle. It's always some aspect of his personality that has to adjust or bend or change or shift in order to attain these new abilities. Which makes that. Yes, it shifts the primary focus away from the magic and the power creep and more to the character development.
So it's man versus himself is kind of the central conflict, and the magic is just a facilitator for that.
To describe
conflict.
it, I think so. I think it's more. So there's this big overarching thing that's happening, and he is the only one that can deal with it. But he's got to go through this transformation first. I'm not good with like categorizing these things because I always want to say, well, it's always kind of everything.
All right, so let's get hard magic. Avatar: Last Airbender, hard magic system. What letter grade are we giving them on their adherence to the rules of magic systems?
I am going to give it a B+, and the only thing that stops it from getting an A is the Avatar himself. I don't feel like there is a hard upper limit to what the Avatar himself can do. So
I assume eventually he shows that he can like bend metal and stuff like that.
So there's a great, I think it's the season finale of season 1, where he goes into what's called the Avatar state and his eyes start going.
Turn red and his arrow changes colors.
Right, and like he at that point he's embodying and has all the knowledge of every previous existence he's ever had. And somebody's like, "Oh, that's it, it's over." And then his eyes start glowing. He goes, "No, it is not over." And then
he doesn't sound like a playful little kid anymore.
Exactly. And this giant water construct the size of a skyscraper comes up and starts just tearing things apart.
So you feel like that's introducing something new without earning it?
No, because then later on the series goes in very much in depth into what happened there. Like it's called the Avatar state, and they're trying. But again, I'm giving it a B+, and it misses the A because we don't have a good cap. There is no clear limitation on what the Avatar can do.
Did I ever show you the Halloween costume we did on my son when he was like 10, where he dressed up as Avatar? We shaved his head. He was so committed. Painted the arrow on bald skin.
That's fantastic. Committed in a way that only a child can be. That's so great.
It was awesome. All right, so there's 3 from the kind of mysticism category. I want to talk about some in the pseudoscience category. So I threw in Back to the Future here because
flux capacitor.
Yeah, time travel is one of those things that we love to utilize as a storytelling device. Over and over again throughout intellectual properties, we like to use time travel. I mean, most recently it was in the Avengers Endgame, but we utilize, and they were kind of very self-aware of the canon of the catalog of time travel literature. But in Back to the Future, there's a single pseudoscience thing, like you said, the flux capacitor. If you can put 1.21 gigawatts into the flux capacitor when you're traveling 88 miles an hour, you can go to any point in time in the same geographic location that you want.
So my counter argument to that is that's kind of the arm wavy thing, like, oh, we have this thing now, way, boo. I think the story is much more interesting when you start thinking about it's less about the technology that allows them to time travel and more about the mechanics of time travel in of itself. Like if you travel to the past and alter the past, what happens? Versus if you travel to the future and alter the future, what happens? I think that's more central to the story.
Yeah, and if it was just about history independent of our protagonist, then I would agree with that. But I think ultimately, and I think the genius of Robert Zemeckis is that it's just man versus himself. You know, the real conflict of Back to the Future is Marty McFly not being able to walk away from a dare.
Yeah, that's kind of the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And the time travel is just a fanciful tale surrounding him learning the lesson that he needs to be able to just chill out and walk away from somebody calling him chicken.
You know what? Like, I have not thought about or watched Back to the Future in a long time. Like, before I started doing all this research and storytelling devices and things. But now that we're sitting here talking about it, I'm like assessing, using my new filters and applying that all to the movies. And I'm realizing that you're right. Those are really good movies. Like, from a storytelling perspective, they did an excellent job of pacing and like setting the conflict and like escalating and just resolution. Yeah, those are good movies.
So I would say Back to the Future is a hard magic system, and I would give it, let me see if I have any reasons not to just give it full points. I mean, when you get into the subsequent movies, there starts to be the alternate timeline kind of stuff, and that's when the time travel theories start to get a bit convoluted, and they try to keep us along for the ride and introduce new conflicts into the system. I'll give it a B+.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a B as well. And the only reason, like you said, it misses full marks is that idea that. So I've watched way too many YouTube videos on different alternate fictional versions of how time travel would actually work.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the Back to the Future is the one where they are like, oh well, you like if you look at time, it's not a line, it's a branching tree, and if you go back to certain points and alter things, you end up going down this other path of the tree. And that one's kind of the softer version of it. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think that's the only reason that it misses full points is that the way that they alter the past, which creates these alternate timelines, is unclear. And, I mean, like, it's a good storytelling device. And, like, it makes the whole, the second movie happen? So, there you go.
Yeah. All right. So you had another one, pseudoscience one.
I did. And I wanted to talk about Star Trek because, man... Gotta love us some Star Trek.
So you're talking about before J.J. Abrams.
I put that specifically in the show notes because, dear listeners, if you're a big fan of J.J. Abrams, like I know Ben, I know you're a big fan of J.J. Abrams, and he rebooted the Star Trek franchise in a way that is completely eviscerating the soul of what Star Trek is supposed to be.
All right. Well, then let's put that aside for now. We can complain about that some other time, and let's just talk about the original Star Trek universe. Now, do you think it's an error to try to just lump it all together? You know, like everything from William Shatner to Deep Space Nine?
I do, because they are discrete, separate entities, storytelling mechanics for different reasons. And so, all right, so before we even go down this road, Ben, we have to have this question answered from both of us. It's got to be. Is it? And I can't. I don't remember. Like, so, is it? Who's your favorite Star Trek captain? Is it Picard?
Picard, no question.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we agree on that at least.
Okay, yeah, Picard, no question.
I'm having a hard time remembering William Shatner's
I've
character
recently been watching the Next Generation, and they're spotty. They're not always great, but again on Netflix, and there was this moment when you were staring at his face, and he did so much acting with his face. I was just in awe of Sir. What is his name?
Patrick Stewart.
I almost wanted to just pause it and just sit there and stare at him in awe and be like, wow, this is amazing. And now that I've been in the military and I understand what it takes to be a military commander, and I see all the nuance that goes into him feeling the responsibility of everyone's lives and the fate of the galaxy and the prime directive and everything, and he's just so masterful at it. It's just amazing.
Well, and there's not enough good things that can be said about Patrick Stewart. James T. Kirk. That's the name of William Shatner's character. I can't. There's people yelling at their podcast again. Sorry, everybody. I forgot what Kirk's name was. I'm a huge Trek fan.
Okay.
But here's if we talk about just the difference between Picard and Kirk as captains, did you ever watch any of the original series?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got Picard who feels like this, here are all the rules and regulations that surround me, and how do I reconcile these with the situation
and Kirk
do the best
is
that
brash
I can?
and carefree and
Kirk
flaunts the rules.
Yeah. Kirk might as well put a freaking Jolly Roger on the side of the Enterprise. He's flying around the seat of his pants, doing whatever he feels like.
Doing whatever he wants.
It's ridiculous. Ridiculous, this guy.
So why are we talking about Star Trek in our discussion about magic systems?
Because Star Trek is, like you were talking about, the pseudoscience. Instead of hand-wavy, pseudoscience stuff, the central magic system and, a lot of the plot points in a lot of the shows is about some weird little nuance of the sciencey stuff that they're talking about that gets them into some pickle or other.
Yes.
From the how many times do we transporters are the safest way to travel, except for the hundreds of episodes that are about transporter malfunctions that create some random weird thing that happens.
So transporters is one.
So we got transporters, we have warp drive and transwarp drive if you want to start talking about Voyager series. We have time travel if you want to talk about some of the original Star Trek movies.
Yep.
We have entities that exist above and beyond what we conceive of as time and space, and we're talking about Q. We have, even some of the movies, they have that probe that speaks humpback whale that comes out of nowhere and starts destroying all of human technology. Like, where did this thing come from? Nobody answered that question.
There's all of the medical technology, all the little wavy, flashing lights that they wave at things.
I love
shields.
that in the 24th century, you can solve every problem with some blinky LEDs, and it's just gone. Yeah. It's like, this looks terrible. Boop, that fixed it. We're good.
Yeah.
Hologram technology, like a lot of the Voyager series, there's a ton of technology, a lot of plot points that revolve around the hologram technology.
Okay. So the pseudoscience is the magic.
Yes.
So let's just pretend that it's the same. It's magic. Where here you are. You're new to the Star Trek universe, and here are the things you need to know. I think they did this really well in First Contact, where you have Ephraim Cochrane, who's about to invent warp drive, who sees the Star Trek people, and he's like, wait a minute, what is this? How can you guys transport? What is this? How can that guy see? What is this? What are these laser things you're holding? It's all just that awe of something new you don't understand.
Right. And at the same time, it can be very hand-wavy. Like, I don't know how if they... Star Trek is really bad for their technobabble. It's like, we don't care. Geordi... All right. Also, a good thing about Picard that I really like is like Jodie would start up on something. Oh, sir, we can do this. This is Jodie. Shut up. Can you fix it or not?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so Star Trek, we're gonna say hard magic.
No. Oh no, sir. I'm gonna say soft. And I can point to that's just for a second. Let's look at transporter technology, the safest way to travel in the 24th century. Okay. So it's like, you have to beam from two semi-moving points. Like, you can't be in warp drive and beam. Oh, except when Scotty figures that out in one of the movies and then later on.
That's the J.J. Abrams movie.
No, sir. He developed transwarp drive in some other movie.
Transwarp beaming.
Transwarp beaming in one of the earlier movies, which is then what Spock gives him later in the prequel with the J.J. Abrams things that we're not talking about. There is, it's the safest way to travel, except when this weird thing happened, and all of a sudden we have two number ones. What's his name?
William Riker.
Yeah, there's an episode of The Next Generation where we have two Rikers.
Yeah.
There was a beaming accident. One Riker made it to the destination, the other one didn't. They were separated for 20 plus years. And the whole thing was just some way to get Riker to deal with a younger version of himself, which was stupid.
Okay. So if you've established a universe around this pseudoscience and you're just trying to come up with conflicts for our, cast that we know well to go through, and sometimes it's man versus man, sometimes it's man versus himself, sometimes it's man versus nature, the pseudoscience, they'll just mix it up to provide another conflict.
Listen, I've got 6 more versions of how they use transporters. This is how transporters work. They take you apart and they put you together somewhere else, except they don't work that way, clearly, because they have all these ways they break the rules.
So hard versus soft, I'm going to disagree with you on this one, because I think they intended for it to be a hard magic system, but then they just break their own rules in order to facilitate the plots.
So they do it intentionally to create these breaking points.
Yes. Hard magic has clear, specific, well-understood rules and limitations. Our pseudoscience is clear, understood, rules and limitations. This is how fast you can go in warp drive. This is how far you can beam with the transporter. This is how many phasers our shield can stop.
I'm going to say that I agree with you that they're breaking they're trying to set these rules, and they break the rules to create pop points. Where we're going to disagree is I think they break them so often that the rules don't really apply. So I'm going to
That's interesting.
So I'm going to say because they do it so many times in this for the specific things that we have set rules for, that they're ignoring it, and that makes it a soft system.
So you're saying because they break the rules so often, it becomes vague and undefined, and the limitations are never understood.
Yes, that's what I'm going to go with.
All right. So let's give them a grade on following the laws of magic systems. It feels like a good proportion of Star Trek is just sitting around listening to people do techno babble to help us understand whatever the limitations of this particular episode we're watching are that will define the boundaries of the conflict we have to resolve in this episode.
Yeah, and they're really bad at the techno babble. Like, there's a lot of techno babble, Ben. But I've got to give them high marks for it. I love Star Trek, but I can't go higher than like a B. Maybe a B minus.
Okay.
Because they like, it is a bunch of techno babble that doesn't make sense a lot of time, and they do pull the occasional rabbit out of their hat for no reason.
So it's interesting because I'm also going to give a B minus, and we'll say I say hard, you say soft, but we both give them about the same grade on following the laws.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're in that gray area between hard and soft that we're kind of both feeling. Yeah. All right. I'm a good with that.
So we had another request from a listener to discuss the Matrix and the magic system in the Matrix.
Ooh, the Matrix. So Matrix. I was in high school when the Matrix came out, and boy, howdy, did I love the Matrix. That was
it was good timing in our lives, I think, to just really be excited about that. It was
I don't know about you. You were married with kids at that point. I was still an angsty teenager, and like that felt just like such a great. And this goes back into like the hero's journey, just like, oh, the world isn't real, and only you random person off the street are the one that's going to fix it all. I'm sitting in the theater like, that could totally be me.
That's me. Okay, so the magic system of the Matrix. I really had a interesting time thinking about this because it's so nuanced and there's so many layers. The first layer is while Neo is still inside the Matrix and still believes that's his world, then there's things that start happening that kind of defy it. You know, like we start off, the opening scene in the Matrix is Trinity looking like, you know, kind of wafy and thin, and then taking on a whole group of cops with guns, and she didn't even have a gun. Right.
Just the super enhanced capabilities that what are we going to call these? The Awakened, the Zion people, the hackers, the protagonists. And the idea is that, and they explain it in the. All right, we're going to have to draw lines.
So the world
here.
as you know it isn't as you know it.
Right. Well, we have to draw lines because there's the first movie and then there's the second and the third movie. And so the first movie, they have a very clear set of rules where it's this idea that once you understand and can accept that the world that you exist in isn't real, it's a simulation, that you have the capability then to exceed the limits. Basically, you can overclock yourself and do these things that aren't supposed to be allowed inside the system if you're aware of it and you can manipulate it in a specific way.
The interesting thing about that is, though, even the most enlightened of our protagonists knew that there was an upper limit that they themselves were incapable of reaching and that they needed someone else to do it for them.
That's true. So that's your prophesied one, right? That's your, like, only you can save us.
Right, and now, Neo is one spelled backwards.
An anagram, I think, of one. But so I saw an excellent YouTube video that broke this down, and the Matrix, the first movie, does an excellent job of setting the power cap. And the idea there is that inside of the magic system, there's limitations. And in the Matrix, the cap was this ability that the agents had where they dodged bullets, where they would go into that like kind of blurry multiple versions of themselves as people were firing guns at them. And like that was kind of set up as, this is the penultimate. This is the top of the ladder. Like, if you can do this, that's it. There's nowhere to go from here.
Right. Maybe flying, they can move so fast that you can't even, that they can dodge bullets.
Exactly. And then by the end of the movie, our protagonist goes through his hero's journey and his character arc, and he reaches that level and then goes beyond it with his flying thing. Now, the problem is we get into the second and the third movies where now Neo starts manipulating things in what is ostensibly the real world.
Yeah.
Like he puts his hand out.
I think the Wachowskis were reaching a bit too hard there.
Yeah. So we went from the first movie had a good, solid, hard magic system that we could wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
Until we walked out of the theater. The second movie, like, wait, what? What just happened? Like, literally, nothing.
Now he's
makes
affecting
sense.
Things in the world, in what we thought was the real world. Yeah. So I want to back up a step. So Neo, of course, lives in his world, and then his computer says, what do you think is real? What is the Matrix?
It says follow the white rabbit.
Right, follow the white rabbit. Okay. So then he starts finding out. He ends up in the building, seeing a few things he can't explain. He's there with Morpheus and gets offered the red pill, blue pill dilemma.
I love the alternate ending that they put in where he takes the blue pill and then the credits just roll.
How it should have ended. Yeah. So and then he goes through this classic thing that happens in any system, just like Luke with the lightsaber, and Han Solo is our doubter. They go, sorry, listeners, we promised there wouldn't be any more Star Wars, and here I am. Han Solo will be like, I've seen a lot of weird stuff I can't explain, but I don't know about this Force business. So, Neo's still doubting and before he finds out. And then, they pull him out of the Matrix and all of his body hair is shaved off and he's got a port in the back of his head. And part of this magic system is that we can stick this port in the back of your head. You can go to some completely different world. And all we got to do is put a disc in this system over here and you can learn anything you want to know.
Well, I mean, that I can wrap my head around that because I'm a computer science major. Like, that's just, they figured out how the human brain works. You can plug this spike in your head, and that's like just a hardcore SATA port. And then we can just, we've downloaded, I'm assuming that at some point they had a guy who actually knew Kung Fu and was a Kung Fu master, and they just downloaded all of the muscle memory and all of the neural connections that are in his brain. And then you're just like, we're going to use this spiky thing to rearrange the crap in your head, and now you know Kung Fu too.
So, pseudo-science. You thought about that part of it way more than I did. I never thought about where they got their files that they were uploading. Like, how do you pilot a Sikorsky helicopter?
Oh, you get a guy that knows how to pilot a Sikorsky helicopter, and you just take all those. Like, you're rooting around a person's head like it's the Windows file system.
I just never thought of another person being involved. That makes me think that, Trinity's like, all right, download me the file for the helicopter. And they, load it into her head, and she's also, I don't know, remembers all the porn the guy has looked at or something like that.
No, I presume that they can filter that crap out. But, that'd be funny if it wasn't. I also think there's an upper limit to how much people can know. So, it's like, oh, great, I can fly this helicopter, but I forgot how to tie my boots. Damn it.
We've reached the limit. Okay, so then let's just for the sake of this, because like you said, they start to break the rules in the subsequent movies. But in the Matrix, I say it's a hard magic system, and I think they do a pretty good job of following the 3 rules.
I think so too. I'm going to give the original Matrix movie. Man, I really like it. They resolved them. Yeah, I'm going to give it an A. I think it hits all 3 Brandon Sanderson's laws. It adheres to it. We know the limits. It resolves in a satisfying way because Neo reaches that full potential. It's a payoff for the character arc. I think it's good.
Yeah.
The subsequent movies, the grade goes down quickly.
And they just went into pre-production for filming the 4th movie. Got back a lot of the original cast.
What? Seriously?
Yeah. Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss.
They resolved
one of the Wachowski sisters now.
Wow.
Directing.
They resolved the main okay, interesting. I will see it, absolutely.
Yeah.
I hope it's decent.
I went back and watched it again recently, and I kind of had the same experience, but more tired and world weary. I still watched the original, which is kind of that sense of wonder and amazement at all the technology they were able to come up with that hadn't previously existed in the filmmaking industry, and how effectively they told this wondrous story that felt familiar and new all at once. And then kind of how it just went on too long and kind of dredged in this futuristic world where they kind of lost their sense of purpose and drive in storytelling. I mean, it has brilliant moments throughout, don't get me wrong. I mean, the freeway scene from the second movie is still just breathtaking. But
definitely. I agree with that. Now, what's interesting is I look back on those movies, when I first saw it as a teenager, I'm like, oh yeah, red pill me, baby. I'm in. Let's do it. I'm everything I've got. Now as an adult, I'm looking at it whoa. Listen, strange man with weird sunglasses in a boxed room that I've never been in before. I got a wife and kids at home, and I got tax returns to file. So
what was the character that wanted to eat the cake? Switch? What was his name? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, you can really start to sympathize with him as time goes on.
Oh, yeah, it's you know what? This sounds terrible. Go ahead and give me that blue pill, and I'm just going to go back to work and be happier. It's oh, man, I had such a lame weekend. It's let me tell you about my crazy weekend.
So hard magic system will give the original an A, and the subsequent movies D.
Decreasing letter grades as they go. The second one was we'll give it a C. The third one, it's got to be a D minus. Oh really? The blind prophet's going to save everyone? Barf.
Okay, so we have. I want to add one more movie in the pseudoscience category. One, because it's a movie I love, and if anyone's not seen it, I want to recommend it. And the other is because it has the same phenomenon that occurs in my favorite movie of all time, that they do one other thing to, and that is they try to add a scientific explanation for it. And that is the Tom Cruise movie called The Edge of Tomorrow. You've seen this one, I assume?
I have seen this one. Big fan of Edge of Tomorrow.
Yes, great movie. Fantastic movie. The central conceit of it, not only do we have a flawed protagonist who's really kind of a jerk, but he ends up caught in this time loop where he's reliving, basically every time he dies, he goes back to the exact same point in his past.
Which is like when he woke up the day before.
And they just add to it like a scientific explanation for, well, because you were associated with this alien race and whatever.
Well, yeah, they yada yada it. It doesn't matter. The conceit in the magic system is he dies, he wakes up one day previous with all the knowledge of what happened that previous day.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I like this in that he spends, first of all, he gets caught in the loop. He's in denial. He goes through the 5 stages of grief. First he's in denial, and then he's bargaining, and then he's in anger, and then acceptance, and I think that's only 4, but that's pretty much what he goes through. And then
depression is one, I think you missed.
Depression, yeah, and he goes through all of these, and then he goes into this performance stage where he realizes that he's got to utilize this loop that he's caught in to try to be a force for good in the world.
And there's a great montage where he's like, you can see him making this transformation and really optimizing, and I love it. Like when he walks into the room, like there are these 2 people that he has to meet for the first time every day, and he's got it down to such a perfect like little science. Like
he knows like, exactly what to say.
Yeah, he's like, your name is this, you're holding 3 fingers behind your back, we did this before, we're skipping all this part, we're going right to work. And like it's just a great little scene.
Yeah, I love it. And I think one of the reasons that movie is so effective. So I'm going to say this is a very hard magic system.
We have a very clear idea, like not how he got it, that's yada yada away, but how it works and what the limits are. Yes, we understand that very well.
Right. And then they use those limitations to help us understand what's going on, stay within the limitations. I mean, it still feels perilous and tenuous. It doesn't feel like, oh, he has these godlike powers and of course he's going to succeed. It still feels like maybe he won't be able to do it. Maybe he can't win.
Yeah, there's a couple of times in the movie where you feel really backed up against the wall.
Yeah. But ultimately they use what we know to accomplish the objective. So I'm going to say, as far as the magic system of The Edge of Tomorrow, I say it's a hard magic system, and I give it an A.
I got to give it an A too. Like I don't think it's not the best movie in the world. It is a good movie, and like you said, I'd recommend people watch it if they haven't seen it. I love Emily Blunt with a helicopter blade as a sword. That's fantastic. Love that.
I didn't know that was a helicopter blade.
Oh, it was. Yeah, it's like a tail rotor or something.
So
ever since I saw the movie, I want a tail rotor sword. Sorry, go ahead.
The other pseudoscience in there is those mech suits that they use for the battles.
Yeah, and that's just like a Tony Stark Iron Man thing. Like the biggest, like we can have those now, Ben. The only limitation is the power source. We don't have enough batteries. Yeah.
All right.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to give it an A. Love it. Good movie. Good use of the magic system. Good way to resolve the plot with the magic system within the boundaries. It's good. It does all the things.
We've talked about mysticism, like magical stuff, and pseudoscience. I added another category that's kind of like the Twilight Zone, the unexplained phenomena of magic, where we don't really figure out whether it's magic or science. It doesn't really matter. Something is going on, and it influences the ability to understand and carry it and deal with the conflict. So the first one is my favorite movie of all time, Groundhog Day. Same kind of conceit as Edge of Tomorrow, but there's no attempt to explain it with alien technology.
No explanation whatsoever.
Just our narcissistic, weatherman from a minor station in Pennsylvania wakes up one day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and is reliving the same day every day he wakes up. The only rule is that whenever he loses consciousness for whatever reason, the next time he opens his eyes, it is 6 a.m. on the 2nd of February.
Just put your little hand in mine.
Yeah. And Sonny and Cher on the radio.
Yes. So... And actually, I think that's an excellent job of the director and the writers, whoever made that decision, of not even trying to explain it through any mechanism whatsoever, because then we, as the audience, experience it the same way that our protagonist does. Like, just confusion, like, wait, what's going on here? And, like, it just goes through the 5 stages again. And, yeah, then we get to have the storytelling.
So since I'm such a fan of this movie, I've consumed a lot of ancillary information about it, like the um, director's commentary on the DVD and writing about it. And there was a lot of debate about that fact that you just brought up. Like, they argued about whether or not they should try to explain where it came from. There was alternate beginnings of the movie where, like, we start in the middle of the movie and there's just Phil walking around knowing everything and we don't understand why.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Ultimately, they decided against it. Don't try to explain why it's happening, and have the viewers experience it as our protagonist does.
I think that was a smart choice.
Yeah, I do too. It's sublime. It was serendipity. I think a lot of the people involved with the production of the movie talk about how it was the pinnacle of their careers, but not because it was this moment of genius, but more like just the stars aligned and everyone worked together, and it out came this thing that was beauty.
Oh, it's a classic. I mean, like, if you haven't seen Groundhog Day and you're listening to this podcast, seriously, like, we love our listeners and please keep listening to the podcast, but stop listening this minute and go watch Groundhog Day. Tell your boss to shut up. You're watching Groundhog Day.
I haven't written it yet, but I'm going to write an essay about how Phil goes through the stages of grief. You know, he goes through this stage of denial, and then anger and bargaining and depression, and then acceptance.
My favorite part about the acceptance is that, like, his version of the acceptance was the first time in the movie. Spoilers for Groundhog Day real quick, is when he offs himself and he drives that truck off the cliff and you're thinking, oh no, what happened to our protagonist? And then he just wakes up the next day back in the bed, sunny in the chair. Ooh, that was rough.
And he got pushed really far to get to that point, but that was also how much he was resisting the transformation that he needed to make. You know,
as a character, as a person.
Yeah, he was willing to die rather than admit that he wasn't a nice person.
Well, he had to. It was just this. This is that's really well done, because everybody wants to blame external sources for their problems, right? And so he's blaming, like, his whole existence is now locked in this perpetual loop. And instead of trying to deal with it or accept it, he'd rather die over and over and over again. And only to the point where it happens so many times that it is proven and demonstrated to be completely moot does he actually start to accept and just like, well, let's see what we can do with this day.
So then at that point, when he tries to make the most out of the day, he truly becomes happy. The weird thing is, though, because we don't understand the limitations of what has happened to him, there's no reason to believe that there's ever going to be any way out.
But I think that's also a good storytelling mechanic. We're talking about this movie. Like, we're getting really far away from our discussion.
Well, okay, but here's where I was going with that. This is why I'm going to downgrade it to an A- on the magic system.
Got it.
Because we don't understand why he's eventually able to find a way out. He doesn't know where it came from. He doesn't know why it happened. And eventually he works his way out of this mystical box that he's been trapped in, but we don't know why that happened.
So it feels capricious almost.
Yes. Because like what about the day before that, when he'd done all the good deeds? You know, he caught the kid falling out of the tree and gave the Heimlich maneuver to Buster, and, you know, and helped the old ladies with the car. Like, did you have to do all of that stuff in one? You know, we just don't know the limits of this system that's holding him trapped.
And, like, there's arguments to be made that neither does he. So who knows? It's just some capricious deity deciding to screw with Phil for a day.
I'll say hard magic system, and I'll give it A-.
Hard magic system, I'm going to give it a solid A. I liked it. Like, they hand-waved the stuff that should be hand-waved and just focused on the things that were important.
Okay. So in the unexplained phenomena area, I added one called Stranger Than Fiction. Have you seen that one? It's a Will Ferrell film.
I am not a big fan of Will Ferrell. I've heard of this movie. I've heard people describe it to me and tell me to go watch it. I have not seen it.
Okay. It's probably in my top 3 favorite films of all time. It is really good. Will Ferrell, if you say I don't like Will Ferrell and that's your basis for not watching the movie, it's not a good basis. It's not a Will Ferrell movie.
Okay. That's probably the strongest advocation for it I've heard.
So the magic of the movie is that he is an IRS agent, and one day, all of a sudden, he begins to hear a voiced narration of his life.
Okay.
And she's accurately describing the things that he's doing. And he goes through a lengthy period where he's trying to figure out where it's coming from and if anyone else can hear it.
Okay. So, obviously, the first answer is, I must be going crazy. I'm hearing a voice narrating my life.
Right. And then at one point, she says, little did he know, but this simple event unlock the chain of events that would lead to his untimely demise.
Oh dear. Why would you even say that in a story?
Because that's a big plot point, and I won't spoil it for you. But then his journey at that point is to find out what that means. Like, why did she say that, and who is she, and how has she influenced my life? So the magic system is our protagonist looks like just a regular schlub living a regular life in a non-magical world, but then this otherworldly phenomena happens to him in an unexplained way, and he has to try to find out what the limitations of it are.
Somebody accidentally clicked on the director's commentary for his life, and he can hear it.
Yeah.
So this sounds a lot like the Stanley Parable, which is a video game that I think I introduced you to.
Yes, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, the character, the protagonist versus the narrator.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know, it defies man versus man, or man versus himself, or man versus nature. Ultimately, he has to come to peace with what his fate is when he knows what his fate is going to be. Imagine you knew how your life was going to end, and you had to just accept it. And
so now we're talking about time travel again, because if I knew how my life was going to end, obviously, then I have to analyze the branching paths.
Sure.
Do
I try to influence it, or does trying to influence change how it's going to become? Yeah.
That's dealt with that is another book series that talks about that a lot.
This isn't done in a time traveling way. This is done in a way that there's an author who's writing his life, and she hasn't written the ending yet, but she knows what she's going to write, and he finds out what she's going to write before she actually writes it.
Oh, that'd be a bummer. Knowing the end of the story while you're having to still suffer through. Spoilers.
It gets kind of convoluted at the end because now he's influencing the writing of his own story. So I'm gonna give this one a B. I'll say it's a soft magic system, and it's a B. Like, because you don't really know, like, does everyone else in the world have an author that's writing their story? And why does the author exist in the same world as the character that she's writing? I don't know.
Well, this sounds a lot like everybody that exists in a musical. It's like, how come we have to stop what we're doing when these two people start singing? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, they did that really well in the one where, not Tangled, Enchanted, where the cartoon girl comes out and ends up in the real world in New York.
Yes, I need to watch the movie again because that's a classic.
Yeah, it is. All right, so so you had said last time when we talked about doing this that we were going to talk about Frozen, and that you wanted to talk about the use of the magic system in Frozen. Now, I thought about Frozen, and I tried to figure out whether it was mysticism or pseudo-science or any, and I think it's just in the unexplained phenomena category. Like, no one else has magical powers. I don't know. What? Give me whether you think Frozen is hard or soft magic.
Okay, so Frozen is the softest of soft magic systems that we've discussed today. Like, it's ridiculous. It's so cushy, like it's like air. It's so soft, Ben. Because there is no, like, how does it work? We don't know. Who has the magic? Nobody but her and the rock trolls, apparently, for reasons. How does it work? The characters don't even know how it works. What are her limitations? Well, in this scene, she got kind of mad and created a couple icicles. And then in this other scene, she stomped her foot real hard and created a fully, like, realized giant, perfect architecture ice castle out of her mind instantly for no reason. Oh, and then apparently ice is flexible, so it can be closed now. I didn't know ice could be closed. There's, I waved my hand while I was singing a song off to the side and randomly created sentient life that persists without my direction. Like, okay, obvious. So, like, everything else aside, like, Elsa, you got angry and you made perpetual winter. They should be far more concerned with the fact that she randomly and sporadically creates life from nothing. She's basically a god walking amongst mortals, and they're concerned with, hey, it's a little cold out. Can you do something about that?
All right. I got an idea for how to approach this. So I like the point that you're making, that this is the softest of soft magic systems. So let's say that these ideas that Brandon Sanderson's talking about are important objectively rather than subjectively. You know, that they transcend storytelling itself. Because then why does Frozen still work? You know, if they just have no regard for these rules in their creating and executing of a magic system, why does it still work?
So this is why I wanted to tear Frozen down. And everybody that I've ever talked to about this disagrees with me. But objectively, quantifiably, I believe Frozen is a bad movie. It is bad storytelling. It is bad characterization. It is bad, inter-character relationships. I can name a thing about a movie and I can point to 6 reasons why it is done poorly in Frozen. And the only reason that movie is top of the box office and everybody loves it and it's such a treasured thing in the zeitgeist is because of the soundtrack. The soundtrack of that movie is undeniably fantastic, and the whole movie is just built on it. But that doesn't make it a good movie. And I talk to people like, Frozen is a bad movie, and everybody I talk to no, it's so good. And then all right, let me start listening to reasons why it's a bad movie. But I really like the song. That's not a reason that it's a good movie.
You remind me of this Far Side comic from back in the 90s that was there was 2 guys sitting in an empty room that looked like it was a big party hall, and there was a banner over their head that said, "The Didn't Like Dances with Wolves Society."
I am the king. I am the head grand wizard of didn't like Frozen. And I didn't like Frozen because it didn't we double everything. Double the orphans. Double the goofy animal sidekicks for no reason. Double the antagonists for no reason. Double the love interests for no reason.
Did
all
you
of
see
these.
Frozen 2?
I have not seen Frozen 2 yet. I'm going to have to. I have kids under the age of 10. Of course I'm going to have to see Frozen 2. I'm surprised that made you already. They have been taken by other people to see Frozen 2. I have not yet seen Frozen 2.
All right. Well, okay. So I'll agree. Excuse me. I'll agree with you that it's a soft magic system.
Reel me in, Ben. I will rip on Frozen all day.
As the viewer don't understand the magic. All that we know is that Elsa can make ice. If I were to try to...
Ben, the characters don't understand magic.
No.
The writers, when they were writing this, don't understand the magic.
But that's why the otherwise irrational reaction of her parents makes so much sense. They're like, we have no idea what's going on. Stop it.
That is completely not what it is. You know why? Here's why. She randomly did a thing that was an accident that hurt her sister. We need to go to the magical authorities that exist in this universe. And they are these rock trolls. They were with the rock trolls for all of 7 seconds. And the head rock troll was like, oh, well, here's the thing. And let me give you a riddle that's explaining everything. As good parents, they should have looked at each other and been like, you know a heck of a lot more about this than we do. Can we leave her here for daycare or drop her off on the weekends maybe?
Jedi Training Academy.
Yes. You know what's going on. It's oh, I'm sorry, we don't accept humans. That's obviously not true because freaking Sven, the other guy, was raised by these freaking rock trolls. There is absolutely no reason that they couldn't have leveraged the knowledge that these rock trolls had. Have you seen the How It Should Have Ended for Frozen?
Yes. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Please do.
No, you're bad parents.
Yeah, it's so what you're saying is...
Stop saying, so what you're saying is...
Yeah, so conceal, don't feel? Wow, you guys are terrible parents. Yes, that How It Should Have Ended is absolutely perfect and one of my favorites.
Now, this is interesting about the 3 rules, because if you don't follow the first rule, then the other 2 almost don't apply. If you don't understand, if the audience doesn't understand the magic system, then how can there be any limitations to break or not break, and how can you be adding something new or not?
That's true. That is absolutely true. So they all kind of build on each other, don't they?
So we can disagree on whether or not Frozen's actually a good movie, but
terrible
soft
movie.
Magic system and F on the magic laws.
Incredibly soft magic. Now let's move on to the laws. Solving conflict with the magic is directly proportional if we understand the magic. The characters don't even understand the magic. And so, literally the end of the movie is she gave her sister a hug and, everything's better now. That was it. That was it. That's how it resolved. Yeah. Is we just decided that the plot is over. So we're going to play the happy music so everybody knows to feel happy, and then it's done. We're finished now. Limitations. What are the limitations, Ben? There are no limits.
I don't know, man.
I'm assuming that Frozen 2 is all about how Elsa creates an army of indestructible, immortal snowmen that then conquer the entire planet. That's what I'm assuming happens in Frozen 2 because that's the only logical thing that a ruler of a country would do. 3, expand on what you have before you add something new. We didn't need a second love interest that then turned into an antagonist for no reason at the end. We already had an antagonist in the little weasel guy. We did not need there's so many things we didn't need in that movie. No.
You're not even talking about the magic system anymore.
I'm not even talking about the magic system anymore. Okay, sorry. So expand on what you already have. How could she expand? I can't. I can't do it. I'm falling to pieces. So here's the problem.
Okay.
I got it. Here's the problem I'm having. How can you expand on infinite possibilities? Like if
that's what I said. If you don't follow the first rule, the other two don't apply.
Yeah, there are zero limits to what Elsa is capable of doing. So obviously we can't expand on that because it's ever expanding into the unknown universe.
Sure. They try to take it back a little bit in the second one because, like, you know, they need there to be a little peril and they need there to be limitations so that there's something to overcome. They realize that the limitations are more interesting than the capabilities.
There is nothing that can't be solved with a giant ice castle out of nowhere in seconds.
Right. Exactly. I love it. That reminds me of one of my favorite sayings. I'll post a meme of this. You know, there are a few problems in life that can't be dealt with the proper application of high explosives.
You got that from an explosive ordnance disposal troop because those guys. Okay. When I was deployed in Afghanistan, I saw that in works. Like there were so many problems that they ran into. A perfect example. One, I have to tell this story. It's so good.
Okay.
I'll keep it short. Is a 1-lane highway in Afghanistan, and there's a convoy of like 20 Humvees on it. And like one side of this 1-lane highway, which is a dirt road, by the way, is vertical cliff going straight up, and the other side is vertical cliff going straight down. They round a corner and realize that the road is blocked by boulders. Like there's a landslide, and the road is no longer a road; it's just part of a hill now. And while the guys are discussing, like, what do we do? Well, we're going to have to back out of this for like 3 miles, one at a time, make sure nobody falls off. And then like the EOD guy comes up and is like, oh, we can just blow that up. And that is exactly what happened. They put some C4 on it. They blew it up. It's a road again. They're like, how are you going to not turn it into just another hill? It's like, oh, well, we'll put it here. We'll have a shape charge this way, and this will go in this direction. And like, yeah, the proper application of high explosives
solved the problem.
The side of a hill back into a road.
Awesome.
It was awesome. Okay. It was super awesome.
So Frozen, so soft magic, give it a letter grade on its use of magic system.
F. Freaking hard F. Like we're going into like, can I give it a G? Like F seriously, minus. It's so bad.
That's the lowest grade. Ask my kids. I give them letter grades on what they do in their life, and the lowest grade I give is F minus.
Wow. How many F minuses do you give to your kids and stuff they do in their life?
Okay. I had one more on the list here, but I'm going to skip that one because I don't really want to get into it.
No, hang on a second. I think we're getting back into bad at parenting about how hard do you grade your kids? How harsh are you, Ben?
Okay. So, bad at parenting. Frequently, the way I like to issue feedback to my children on their execution of life and duties is by just issuing a random letter grade. Ooh. I'd be like, all right, whose day was it to do the dishes? C+.
Wow.
Or who was supposed to empty the garbages around the house? I've seen 3 that haven't been emptied. D-.
Okay, that makes sense. I more of a just like a way of giving general feedback. Okay, I'm okay with that. So I'm going to cut you off for a second. All right. So we're running kind of long. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do is we realized that the last couple episodes we'll just talk and talk and talk. So we actually still have, like a page and a half of different intellectual property?
I thought maybe we could transition to a rapid fire mode for these ones, or do you just want to try to continue the discussion in the future?
We can't. All right, so dear listeners, the next category that we have in here is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And if anybody knows me in real life, there is no way we're going to rapid fire through the MCU on this one.
All right, so maybe we'll continue another time.
I think that's probably for the best. Maybe we could do some kind of alternate spin-off episode where we just talk about these and let people download it separately.
Because I had a good time with the Disney cartoons. I got to tell you, when I went through and just made a list of all the Disney cartoons that use magic, try to categorize them and see how well they use it, I had a good time with that.
Ben, I'll tell you right now, I have some very, very strong feelings about Disney movies and the way that they're handled in pop culture. Hashtag Gaston is not the bad guy.
How it should have ended by Josh. Okay. Well then, teaser for next time. Josh and I had been discussing some of the limitations of his old PC, and he finally looked at it and realized that he hadn't updated his PC in 8 years?
Yeah, the PC that I'm actually recording on this minute was built in 2011, which in PC terms, this thing should have died long ago.
All right. Well, it's still hanging in there. That's a testament to how well you built it in the first place.
Oh, thank you.
And I assume you upgraded it a couple of times from when it was first built.
I upgraded the video card once.
All right. So we're kind of testing what kind of content we can create. So Josh is going to try his hand at doing a build video.
Yes. So I got all of. It was a struggle. Like being like the typical build video is some guy like Linus from Linus Tech Tips, where he's like, "Oh, I've got more money than God, and so I'm going to build this $10,000 machine because it's awesome." There's Josh over here like, I have 2 kids and a strict budget set by my wife, so let's see what we can do with that.
That's interesting. You know what? That's interesting because of the limitations.
You're right. There it is. Sanderson's second law. I will say, like, I'm working on that. I'm going to try to get it up in the next week or so.
Okay,
and,
so watch for that on our YouTube channel. We'll put a link out on Facebook and maybe if you want to, maybe on the website.
Yeah, spoilers, bad at making YouTube videos. Let's tell that right
now. Okay. Now, another thing we had a couple of our listeners request is it's been a while since we've done a book review. Now, I recognize that these are a bit controversial because if you don't read the book we read, then there's just an hour's worth of content that you aren't really engaged in. So we'll do our best to try to make it something you can engage with. But I want to give our audience an opportunity to weigh in here. So I'm going to put a poll up on Facebook and on Reddit, and we're going to make it a vote where Josh and I have each nominated one nonfiction, one fiction title each, and then I'll put a write-in vote column, and we'll see if we can get the audience to get engaged on what our next book review will be. So my nominations are How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen, Rhodes Scholar and Harvard professor, and he died last week. And so I thought that would be timely to review his book, be one of my all-time favorites. And then my fiction nomination is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Which is more like a homework assignment than it is like, oh, I'm going to go read a fun book. No, I'm
all right. Well, if the audience votes for that one, we'll read it. Go ahead with your nominations.
All right. So my nominations are, my nonfiction one is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is kind of cheating a little bit because it is a book about fiction, about how to write fiction. And it's this book by Joseph Campbell where he describes the storytelling mechanics that we use in so many ways. Like there is this set cookie cutter thing that we do in so many different books, media, stories, and how everything fits into the same mold and how stories progress and build and how they're resolved. And it's very interesting. My fiction nomination, I try to keep it short because I'm not going to assign a 25-hour book for people. It is by my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson, and it is 3 short stories that put together to be about 10 hours long, and it's called Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds. And what I'm going to tell you, Ben, is this book is about who is arguably the smartest man on the planet, but the way that his intelligence manifests is whenever he ingests information, and he can do it in incredible speeds, just like glance at pages of a book, and he can read it all instantaneously and dumps into his brain. But the way that he utilizes it is then his mind creates a separate personality that is a hallucination, a figment, another complete person with a personality that has all of that information. He doesn't. His alternate personality does. And to him, they are real people. But he knows they're fake, but they're still real. Like he goes and he buys 5 seats on an airplane to take 4 fictional people that he knows are fictional that other people can't see. But he has to do it anyway because they're real to him. And he is a private detective.
Wow. Okay, that sounds interesting. I'll add that to my queue regardless. But I think what we'll do is we will agree now to do whatever the audience majority voice comes up with. So right. We'll put those 4 nominations in a write-in category, and whatever gets the most votes wins. I'll try to put that up, the same time I publish this podcast, and we'll leave voting open. So next time we talk, we'll just talk about who won, and then the time after that, we'll review it.
Good. So that gives the audience 2 weeks to vote, and then that gives them 2 weeks to catch up on the book.
Right.
Perfect.
So with then for next time, what I'd like to tease is in episode 12, we talked about the British game show Mastermind, and we talked about what our topics were, and I would like to do it for real. So for next time, let's do Bad at Magic Mastermind Edition. And I will prepare questions for you on Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and you can prepare questions for me on Mormon Doctrine, and we will ask each other questions and keep score and see who wins.
We will need to have a lengthy discussion about the types of questions that we can ask, because, I mean, like, either one of us can really mess with the other person depending on how, like, nitpicky we want to get.
I have a feeling this problem's going to work itself out. I think you and I have good judgment about this kind of thing.
That sounds bad. If you start asking me names, like, that's going to be a problem. There are hundreds of characters in those books, man.
All right. Well, thanks to our listeners.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no. I was going to talk more about Mastermind and complain about it, but we'll do that some other time.
All right. Well, thanks to our listeners. Thanks to those of you who are engaged in the community. The Reddit subreddit is starting to wake up, and we're starting to get good discussion going on there. So if you haven't yet, go to reddit.com/r/badatmagic and join in the discussion. If you found yourself yelling at your podcast player of your choice or your phone during this podcast, let's hear your voice. Go on the subreddit and tell us what you got. If you want to see some magic content or Josh's PC build video, you can go to our YouTube channel. We're on Facebook. If you want to see the photos we've been talking about, I'll try to post some of the memes and photos and stuff we did today. Or if you want to vote on the book discussion for 2 episodes from now. And we are now on Patreon. So I realized last time I didn't explain this good enough. So Patreon is a website that's designed to help support content creators. And it allows you to pledge to make donations to support something that go directly to the content creators. So we now have a page on patreon.com/badatmagic where you can go and support the show if you would like.
My standard accompaniment to the Patreon, like, we absolutely thank all of our patrons so far. Like, the donations and the support that you give us are fantastic and very appreciated. Thank you so much. For those of you who don't feel like giving us, money or donations through the Patreon, that's fine too. Like, just spread the word. Like, tell your friends if you enjoy what we talk about, if you think we're somewhat entertaining or just nonsensical, please just let somebody know.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and thanks for the chat, buddy.
Always good talking to you, Ben.